Welcome everyone to another episode of 30 Minutes with a Monomystic. Welcome, Michael. My name is Sascha, and today's topic is Atlantis and Lemuria. Obviously, Michael didn't know about it until a couple minutes ago, so that's going to be interesting. Okay, let's start with Atlantis. So obviously, Atlantis is quite common theme in so many movies.
Whoa. Lemuria came first, so let's start with Lemuria.
There you go. So that's wonderful. Okay, so you're saying Lemuria came first. What I know of Lemuria is that some guy, I think in the 19th century, said, oh, I guess because animals and some plant species are somewhat similar in two different continents, it must have been, and one guy said, it must have been between India and Africa. And I think it was a guy who was doing some research on Madagascar. And there was some other guy who said, no, it was between America and Australia. And then you have all these people who are saying, we are Lemurian incarnations, we remember all these things. Give us an intro, Michael. What is your insight into Lemuria? What is Lemuria? Does Lemuria exist? Did Lemuria exist? Is Lemuria real?
First of all, I think you'll find that South America and Africa and India and Australia were all one, rather than two different views of it, were all one, and it's called Gondwana land. And Lemuria is interesting. I had quite a number of incarnations in Lemuria.
So you're confirming right off the bat that Lemuria was real. Okay.
And I did not have any in Atlantis. I'm really aware of that.
Okay.
The Atlantean energy and mine, I never went there, I never incarnated into that. But in Lemuria was very much, there was very much a oneness with the earth, with the mineral kingdom, very much with stones. Now, near where I am living now, this gets interesting, there's a place called Mount Timbawa. And Mount Timbawa is so small a mountain, you could drive almost to the top. It gets a bit rugged and you have to stop. It's smooth rock, you can walk on easily, there's no climbing. There's just an uphill walk to the very top. And when I first came up to Queensland, going back quite a way now, go back a bit further. When I emigrated to Tasmania. When I was in Tasmania, I got a map of Australia and put a circle around a place called Nambour. And I said, that's where I should live. And put the map away and forgot about it. And I always felt the urge, as I moved into my spirituality, I felt the urge to move away from being a dairy or beef farmer and into just the search. And I devoted my life to the search, for who am I, and how to cross that path, that gulf of separation. So I devoted myself to the search. And I really didn't worry about income, and that was a problem. There's no question about it, that was a problem. But it was like, I like to say, a magnificent obsession. But anyway, I'm sure for a lot of people, they didn't see it as magnificent. And when I eventually settled and created a community and settled in it, helped create a community and settled in it, I then had an urge to come up to Queensland. And I knew that I had to be north of Brisbane. And so the time came when we drove up. I'd inherited a small amount of money and I was able to buy a property, smallish house, 3-bedroom house on about a hectare of land. Interestingly, that house is probably now, that property is now, it's worth a lot more. But anyway, I continued. When I got to this land where I live now, there was one day I found the map that I'd marked and I'd forgotten about it. And I saw on it this circle, and I'd put a dot in the middle of the circle, and I'm living on that dot that I'd put there probably about 18 years ago. Personally, Sascha, I'd rather have you on the screen, because then I feel I'm talking to you, even though I do my best to look up at this thing. I feel I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I just changed that so people, when you're talking, they can see you, but we can leave it like that too.
Yeah, it's a conversation in many ways. So let's leave it that way. And so when I got to this mountain, then I felt an impulse. I'm on a mountain, a small mountain, a mountain ridge. Then I felt the need to, I don't know why, to go to Mount Timberwell. So one day I drive to it and I get out, and I'll keep the story, I'll keep away from the story, I've written that. And I discover what I termed then as a mountain lord, which was a very, very powerful energy. And through that being and through several experiences that came after that, I learned that I lived on that mountain. That was my basic home place when I lived in Lemuria. And so I had spent so much time there that I walked in, you know, if you get you hold a glass like this, you leave a thumbprint and fingerprints, and they can be picked up and dusted off, and they can be preserved on that glass for a very long time. Well, when you go to spend a lot of time in a place, you create an energetic print, like an energy print. And so I had spent so much in the area of Mount Timberwell, which is about 15 kilometers to 20 kilometers away from where I live now. I'd spent so much time in it that I had an energy imprint. And in that energy imprint, there was a lot of deja vu, seeing back to that time. I was a much taller being than I am now, probably closer to 7 foot tall, much leaner, and with a very, very much greater empathy and connection with the earth, meaning both the earth and the planet Earth. And I had a deeper connection with the minerals of the earth and with nature. Intelligence was greater, intellect was different. Intellect was based much more in the moment. And so the intelligence and the intellect were very much more acute and based in the moment. So with that went great insights and great intuition, which was a way of discovery in Lemuria rather than through the path of knowledge. Knowledge, people don't realize it. Knowledge does have a use-by date. Okay.
Sounds like a quite enlightened place compared to nowadays.
It's more enlightened. The population was more enlightened, but not with the spiritual enlightenment that, say, I have today, which I call a holistic enlightenment, in as much as it affects me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. It is
looking at it chronologically and going back to what we talked in one of these other episodes, all these alien stories and the story of creation. Where does Lemuria come in there? Was it there before the reptilians came that you were describing?
I would say, to be accurate, now I can't say this categorically, but I'm pretty sure that it was a different timeline.
Okay.
So, I mean, what we don't realize is that timelines keep splitting, and we only ever seem to be aware of the timeline we're on. So does history look back on various timelines? Of course it doesn't, because our history doesn't follow, for instance, King Arthur and the knights. History doesn't record any of that. It's not a historical fact. But the castle he was all supposed to be, and I've been there and walked it. And because I walked it, I sat down and focused on it metaphysically. And King Arthur did exist on another timeline. So for us, it's a legend and mythology, but for that timeline, it's reality.
It's interesting though that one, now this is a slightly different topic, but it's interesting though that one timeline could have a recollection of something that's split off into a different timeline.
Yeah, it is interesting because in the end, although we have a fascination and are indoctrinated with separation, there is no such thing as separation. And so here's the paradox. All timelines are one, even though we call them separate timelines.
And I guess that's where all these mystics and writers and visionaries and all these people come in who sometimes maybe tap into different timelines, and they bring back memories, they bring back ideas, they bring back concepts, they bring back stories and carry them into another timeline.
I mean, even the people like, Nostradamus.
Yeah, so many examples.
Oh yeah, there's so many examples. And even like Jules Verne, the writer and author, there are so many examples of touching other timelines. And I'll even go as far as to say in modern timelines, Steven Spielberg, his first Jurassic Park, he touched into the velociraptor. I've seen velociraptors metaphysically, and I've been amazed at their intelligence. He connected with their intelligence and so much of their energy to such a degree and to such a depth that when I saw it, I was completely shocked how accurate that was. And I didn't speculate that at the time, but since then I've speculated that because we're metaphysical beings, metaphysically, he followed that timeline because of his intent and focus.
Yep.
And whoever else he brought in to be the authority on that, they touched on that timeline exactly of the velociraptor.
Sounds reasonable. And even though you might not be aware of it, if you are a person with sensitive creativity, I think it's very easy for you to tap into any energy you like, even though you might not be aware of the metaphysical principles behind it, even though it might not be very intentional, but just by the strength of your imagination, you can do that probably.
That is the key. I was just going to say that. You've got that. It is the imagination is the key. Like William Blake gave freedom to his imagination. And when he was doing a sculpture once, and he's doing a bust of a famous historical figure, he's working on the nose and he stopped. And his friend was, why have you stopped? He said, well, I can't see it anymore. And his friend says, see it? I mean, it's never been there. How do you see it? And William Blake said, you work imagination up to the point of vision and the thing is done. And it's exactly right.
Okay, let's move back to
we're taught today imagination is nothing. It's not real.
But let's stick with Lemuria and Atlantis. Okay, so you were saying that mountain close to where you live right now was part of Lemuria. So
it was.
So Australia must have been part of Lemuria. But then again, you're also saying it happened on a different timeline, yet still we are in that timeline, and that mountain and energy imprint exists close to you. I guess that's the paradox, huh? Right?
Good, keep going. You're going well. Yes, I mean,
just trying to make sense of it.
Timelines separate, but we use the word separate to communicate. Let's say timelines move apart, but continue with togetherness.
Right, and physical form like the mountain you're talking about could remain in both timelines.
Yes, yes. The physical form remains. And we're moving into a timeline separating now.
Right.
And there'll be a degree of apartness in them, but it won't be, but we will see it as separate.
Let's go back to that question that I brought up a couple of minutes ago. History, aliens, genetic manipulation, the creation of what we now are as a human race. Where does Lemuria fit in? Was it, you're saying that's when we started with a timeline. You're saying it might be a different timeline. So it's not being part of any of that story, you think?
You've got to, the problem is that we have been hybridized a lot. There are people who claim that there are as many as 22 different alien species, the genetic codes in ours. That's rather a lot. And so some of those, have they become more I will go along with this, even though I could say I don't know that as metaphysically checked out. I go along with this. Intuitively, it feels right. And so some of those some of those strains of 22 types of human, different genetic influences become dominant. And sometimes that domination causes them to move on to their own timeline to experience the dominance of a certain gene, alien gene. We're on a timeline completely unaware of them as they're unaware of us. We're on a timeline that is dominated by a gene of enslavement, because we were altered mostly toward enslavement.
What was
so compliance is strong in our genetic makeup.
Was Lemuria something, a society or a culture that spanned over a long period of time, or was it rather short-lived?
Lemuria came to an end rather in the way same as Lemuria did, but being really and truly, that's a timeline ending and merging. And so the timeline of Lemuria, I don't know how long it is, but it was certainly, if you're going to take linear time, it was certainly, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of years.
Quite a long time.
Definitely a long time.
And are you aware of how it ended? Why?
No, I'm not particularly aware of how it ended. They'd say that Atlantis went under, and but I'm not sure of how Lemuria, if I was to hazard a metaphysical guess, I would say the opposite of flooding. I would say of volcanoes and earthquakes.
From your memories, from your recollection and your metaphysical visits, can you describe Lemurian culture a little more? So you were saying you were tall, you lived on that mountain, and you had a stronger connection with Earth. What about society? What about?
Lemurians, to me, were a gentle people. There was no warrior classes at all.
Aggression?
They were gentle people. They were introspective, and they had this incredible affinity with nature that we will one day go back to. And I think I've seen a probability future. Well, it's not a probability, it's happening now. But when I go to that is a probability. Certainly many people will, where I would say that the Lemurian influence has come back. The timelines have merged with that Lemurian influence, because what I saw to me was nothing short of miraculous. But the Lemurians had a relationship with trees and with nature. I wouldn't say nature was bent to their will, but there was a level of cooperation that was extraordinary. And so they did have types of cities. And in those cities were structures basically of stone, but the stone was shaped and moved in ways that we can't do today. It's as though the stone had become pliant, like a soft plastic, as if we were using plasticine as shaping buildings. It's as though it had become pliant and then re-solidified. And with those small, very small cities, there was an enormous amount of trees in them, and they were carpeted. There were no vehicles. We walked. There was no hurry. The people were very peaceful. Hurry really didn't exist. It wasn't in their reality, hurry. They were very peaceful. And to a degree, there was a certain level of stagnation taking place.
How about money and trade?
Let me finish. That is when timelines come to an end. When all the probabilities have been explored in that, and the probable probabilities have been explored, then that timeline will once again merge with another one. Or there is in us now, there is a stagnation. We're becoming stagnant. And so this has to end. And in the Lemurian time, there was a stagnation took place, but it wasn't like ours. It was a slight complacency, not an apathy, but there was a stagnation, and so it moved into another timeline. Some say that timeline then became the Atlantean period, where the dynamic that they lost in Lemuria appeared in the Atlanteans, who then took it into a warrior and, a warrior caste, priest caste, and other castes.
Let's stick with that Lemurian stagnation for a second. What was it that caused it? So you're saying complacency in terms of, okay, everybody's connected to the earth, everybody's peaceful, we're just walking around, no stress, there's no real motivation. What was lacking? What was missing?
The dynamic. When I say complacency, I'm trying to use today words to fit in beings that didn't really, complacency doesn't fit. So I will say they lost the dynamic. I have no memory of passion.
Okay.
In them. And passion is part of the dynamic that you need.
Does that have to do with emotions? Did they not have the same emotional depth as
No, they didn't have the same emotional makeup that we have today. Their emotions were lesser, and they didn't have passion in their emotions. They didn't have rage and anger and some of those things. And although they're not, rage and anger are not to be looked on as desirable traits, they are catalysts of growth, whether it's upward growth or downward growth. They break the mold of more. No, that's not true. They can create more of the same as well as. It's really difficult. It's like, it's really difficult to describe this.
I get it.
Let's just say they lost the dynamic and they lost passion.
Okay. Were they born and did they die the same way we were born and die today?
They were born and they died, but they didn't believe in birth and death, so they didn't celebrate it because they saw themselves as immortal living beings, and moving in and out to them was no big deal.
Did they have the same male-female makeup that we have today? And did they have marriages? Did they have sex? What was that all about?
They did those things, yes, but the marriages, our marriages can be pretty torrid. There's a whole range of emotions go in our marriages, from rotten to brilliant.
Sure.
They didn't have that range, and so their marriages were what you would call lower key,
more functional
than ours. And if by mutual agreement they were moving in different directions, no big deal. They just move in different directions. So their marriage wasn't a ceremony. It was simply a coming together agreement, a mutual agreement that could end with a mutual agreement just the same.
Okay.
It it was very, very different from ours, and yet not so very different at all.
Sounds quite dry. Was there a lot of love in Lemurian times?
Not the not love with a passion in it.
Okay.
Love in the terms of the power of creation. They created in nature, they created in stone, and they did that. But there wasn't the passion that some of our sculptors would have. But how much of them is in our sculptors would be an interesting one. And so I never witnessed or never experienced that dynamic that we had. They were an admirable, beautiful, peaceful, loving race, but not loving with passion, loving in a way that is gentle and flowing, like a dog. If it loves you, I mean, God, it'll do somersaults. We don't quite do somersaults, but we're used to passion, even in many of the animal kingdom. You know, I've seen many animals exhibit passion for their owners, lions and bears, quite a few. They didn't have that at all. That just wasn't there. That's a later development and a needed development. In fact, today, I consider our passion in us is going down. Yeah. I don't consider rage as a high passion. It's a low passion.
I think as a general, we are quite numbing down.
We're dumbed and numbed.
Dumbed and numbed, yes. Did they, or were you aware of them having any contact with other races, other beings, whether terrestrial or non-terrestrial?
I have a feeling they did, but I'm not aware of it. In my connection with them through that mountain and through the imprints, I am not aware of any. I have a feeling that there was extraterrestrial connection, a lot of it. But for me personally, I don't have any memory of being connected with them.
What was their average lifespan? Any idea? And how about disease?
None at all.
How about sickness? Did they have sicknesses or did they not have? All of this sounds like it wouldn't be very prone to sicknesses, that type of.
They didn't. I'm not aware of sicknesses much. It's like a carefree, trouble-free. It was so trouble-free, it lacked the spur of growth. Like I've always said, I don't believe in the message of conversationists, conservationists. I'm talking conservation. Oh God, conversation. Okay, let's try this again. I love conservationists, not for their beliefs in that they're saving this whale or that thing.
But there's a lot of passion.
Nothing is lost. But I love them because they're a big thorn up the backside of human apathy. And a lovely long pin. And that I love about them.
Wonderful. Okay.
That's a positive form of jabbing.
So we're saying they didn't have any diseases, at least you're not aware of it. And but generally crystals and minerals are being associated with healing. So what use or what did they make of all this mineral connection if there was no need for healing?
That's your Atlantean belief coming out. Atlanteans were very much into crystals, but the Lemurians are very much into minerals and not so much crystals. They were into earth minerals. And there are many minerals today that are used, like tourmaline, and many minerals, black and white, that you put together create an energy field of healing. A friend of mine's doing that. I wish I could remember exactly what he was using. He's been using that with huge effect right now, but the Lemurians had a great reverence and connection with the minerals of the earth and use them in interesting ways. Like they could stimulate the growth of a tree. but not against the will of the tree. It's as though
Okay, I mean, we're about to end,
yeah,
and the time is about over. We haven't really talked about Atlantis, so we have to do that in a separate session. But my last question would be, how about their diet?
vegetarian and fruitarian totally.
Okay,
They didn't cook. I have no memory of cooking.
everything raw. Okay,
Everything was eaten raw, and probably attributes to their very good health.
agriculture,
Not to my awareness at all.
just picking from nature.
Now, I'm not saying I'm right about this.
No, I know.
My experience. So please don't say everybody go away. This is what he said. This is my experience.
There's so many more questions, but maybe just, did they have art, books?
Yeah. They had art in their homes, and the art was pretty incredible.
What type of art?
It wasn't on paper, it was on bark. And the bark was as thin as paper, but it was absolutely bark. Now, I didn't know I knew that. That's interesting. I didn't know I knew that. But yeah, it was on very thin bark, and the bark could be shaped. And so some of their art would be like ripples. And so there'd be a artwork done of a stream, and you could see the ripples in the stream, and they didn't move, but they were there because the bark that they were on, the ripples are already built in as part of the art. So it wasn't just the painting on the ripples on the bark; it was the very back frame itself.
Now, since you're on a streak of things that you don't know that you do know, let me just continue for a moment. Did they have leaders, political structures? Was it more like a tribe?
It was more like families. And a family wasn't necessarily relations, it was compatibility. And so if you, for instance, were working with a certain type of tree, and everybody who was working with that and was compatible, and they would be there. So sometimes there could be families that might be several hundred people, and another group might be much more obscure family with only a few dozen people.
Did they
basically they enjoyed each other's company.
Did they have language, or did they communicate telepathically?
Yeah. Language, yeah, definitely language, spoken language, and oh, absolutely. And they communicated better than we do because they're actually able to listen, and we never listen; we only hear.
Did they have priests or spiritual leaders or religious leaders or any like enlightened masters that they would look up to?
Nothing like that I'm aware of. They had their own deep seated awareness of their spirituality in as much as their connection with the whole. That was what they called their spirituality. There were no tangents, branches off that. They were connected to the whole. And the whole, if you like, was God.
Let's close in saying what we as modern humans could take away from the Lemurian experience as you are aware of it.
We would, if we could take away and bring into ourselves a oneness that we even have as humanity, human oneness. It's strongly conceptualized. Most people have a concept of it, but the reality of it is very, very rare. You know, what you do to somebody else, you do to yourself. I mean, hey, look what's going on today. And so the concept of that is well established. The reality of it, the experience of it, the expression of it is hardly any evidence of it at all.
What's a good practical way for someone who has no experience of oneness so far to begin tapping into that experience of oneness?
To look into their own eyes and ask the question, who is looking out of these eyes?
Okay.
If that doesn't kick anything off, then that person is already the walking dead.
Thank you, Michael. And we'll have to do another session on Atlantis because we didn't talk about Atlantis at all.
I was never in Atlantis, so you're not going to pull things out of there.
And you never knew about Lemurian wall decorations. So here we go.
Oh, there you go. I'm
Wonderful.
actually now, I'll leave it.
Thank you so much, and see you on the other
Thank you,
side.
Sascha.
Make sure to subscribe to Michael's channel. Make sure to share the video if you like it, and do all these beautiful things. See you again.
And thank you for listening, and I love you.